Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, Tom, and a huge thank you to the ACSF for supporting this project and helping make my work possible. I'd like to start my talk today with a quote from author and photo critic Susan Sontag, who wrote in 1975, quote, "If photography has a place within the humanities, it might very well have a kind of central place, because it is not only a form of art under certain restrictions, but it also has a place where all kinds of sociological and moral and historical questions can be raised." In my talk today, I'm going to provide an overview of my larger artistic practice, discuss the Madonnelle project in detail, and discuss what's left to be accomplished. On the right side, we have an image from my project Transnational, which focused on religious spaces in transition. This image presents a service at the Chapel of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal in Paris, which dates back to 1815 and is the site of a supposed appearance of the Virgin Mary in 1830. Now a major international pilgrimage site for Roman Catholics, the chapel services overflow crowds during multiple services each week. Here you can see the stream of people down the center aisle taking communion captured through a long exposure photograph. For nearly 20 years, my practice has utilized photography and video to examine the role of architectural space in shaping individual identity and contemporary social issues. I interrogate the hierarchies that built spaces convey and the ways that people, objects, and spaces intersect to create new meanings. I grew up and am still an atheist, so it's perhaps surprising that for the past 15 years, my work has frequently involved religion. Despite not believing in a higher power, I'm fascinated by religion and the role that it plays in our society and in the larger world. I grew up going to church at Christmas and Seders at Passover. I appreciated them for the excuse they created to celebrate, to connect with family and friends, and for the shared community they provided. When my family and I moved to upstate New York in 2011, one of the places that we found community was through Temple Emmanuel, which you can see here, a Reformed Jewish synagogue in nearby Utica. My family's connection to the temple led me to embark on a photography and film project about how religious spaces were changing in upstate New York as a result of rising secularism and the arrival of diverse newcomers in the area in the form of immigrants and refugees. Here you can see an example of what I was interested in, the subtle transition of a former Methodist church in downtown Utica when it was converted to a mosque. The project was made in collaboration with my Hamilton colleague, S.B. Plate, and resulted in a 45-minute documentary film about the changing nature of religious life in central New York. A short trailer is accessible here on this website, link on the screen here. I also have it incorporated in the presentation here. It's about 2 minutes long. I'm going to try and play it. We'll see whether the audio comes through. If it doesn't, Tom, you'll let me know and I'll just zoom ahead and people can look at it later on their own.
Well, they used to call Presbyterians and Methodists and Lutherans and so on mainline. Then they started calling them old line. And lately I've heard sideline. So it's hard to be part of a diminishing movement. How do we be what we're called to be with diminished resources, with this huge, you might say, albatross of a beautiful building?
When the Jewish people settled and built their own temples, they put everything they had into it. They didn't just have a building and put a star in front of it and say, this is our temple. They built what they wanted from their heart. And the temples were beautiful.
The thing that it was a church before and now a mosque is not something that's unknown through the history.
If anyone's interested in watching the complete film, feel free to email me. I'm happy to share a link to the project. When I was on sabbatical in 2015, I was able to travel to Europe and expand to the project that I began in Utica. I spent time in Berlin, and one of the things that I was struck by was how invisible religion felt there, particularly non-Christian spaces. Here we see 4 mosques, each blending into its environment to varying degrees. And here 4 synagogues. In some cases, there was almost no traditional iconography identifying these spaces as houses of worship. One reliable indicator that I'd found the right spot was the presence of security cameras or sometimes even armed guards. I also did extensive research across faiths, focusing on significant religious spaces, particularly those that had undergone some kind of transition in their history. And I was able to gain access and make long exposure photographs of services in a wide range of houses of worship. Here are 2 examples. On the left, we have the Fatih Mosque in Amsterdam, originally opened in 1921 as the Catholic Church St. Ignatius. The space has operated as a Turkish mosque since 1982. And on the right, we have Basilica San Clemente in Rome, which offers a rich history of religious use dating back to the 1st century when the site was used as a Mithraic cult sanctuary. With the rise of Christianity, the space was rebuilt and repurposed as a Christian basilica in 392 and named for St. Clement, with the current structure dating to approximately 1100. This former 17th century Catholic church, previously known as San Salvatore in the Campo, has been lent by the Holy See to the Eritrean community since 2007. Eritreans, then part of Ethiopia, began arriving in Italy in the late 1970s, largely as a result of their former status as an Italian colony. Sunday Mass is a standing room only affair with crowds overflowing onto the piazza in front of the church. As part of the project, I often also recorded audio, and the clip from the church, this clip from this church being one of my favorites, I'll play for you here. Hopefully, the combination there of the visual and the oral gives you a sense of the sensory experience that I was experiencing and also what I was interested in. Returning to the US, I attempted my first map-based project, creating an accordion fold book documenting every mosque along the highway system from JFK Airport to Syracuse, New York. The premise of the book is to visually present the path and the potential communities along the way that a recent Muslim refugee or immigrant might consider after their arrival in the US. The images in the book were captured using Google Street View, casting a sense of foreboding over the work as each mosque is presented as a momentary target of a much larger and dominant corporate or governmental surveillance apparatus. Using letterpress printed covers offer a simplified Google map of the region, and a vellum slipcover incorporates Google's icon for mosque at the particular location of each image in the book. And you can see here at the bottom, stop motion animation of me creating the book in the studio at Hamilton College. The book was partially inspired by Ed Ruscha's 1966 book, Every Building on the Sunset Strip, which utilized a slow-moving car, a bulk film loader, and a mechanized winder to capture every storefront along a section of Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, California. Unlike Ruscha's work, every mosque examines a particular population, the Muslim community, across a large geographic region through a series of discontinuous images presented as a continuous strip. In doing so, a viewer is presented with a typological view of contemporary American mosque architecture, with its inherent diversity, but also with its geographic isolation in what might often be considered less desirable locations. In using Google Street View as the source of the images, I was interested in the arbitrary things that Google captured, whether a halal truck partially blocking the view of the view or a mosque at the end of a rainbow. And here's a presentation of the book at SUNY Cortland's Dowd Gallery in 2017. So now the Modern LA project, which is the focus of the talk today. This project began when I returned to Italy during my second sabbatical in 2022. I had intended to continue working on my transnational project, but things were going very badly. I had sciatica in my lower back and was unable to carry my tripod or other camera gear. Shortly after that, my camera bag was stolen while I was on a train between Milan and Venice. Feeling down, but not completely out, I resorted to my remaining camera, the iPhone, and began photographing sidewalk shrines. Society was just coming out of COVID, and these shrines, which often included remembrances to individuals, felt like a poignant reflection of the tragedy we had all just faced. Dating back to ancient times, early Romans worshipped the Lars, or the spirits of the house, placing small shrines in their honor around their homes. These devotional sites were also placed at intersections, often with the inclusion of an oil lamp, serving an important civic function as streetlights, guiding the way of visitors and watching over locals. I was interested in the mixed treatment of these icons, in some ways revered, but also often desecrated, neglected, and the subject of graffiti or even vandalism. This rapid-fire slideshow presents the more than 290 Madonnelle that I photographed in Rome over 2 months as a result of the fellowship that I received. These are presented at 1 second each, so over the next 3.5 minutes or so, 4 minutes, you'll see all the images that I completed during the project. I thought this might be an interesting way to kind of try to share it quickly with everyone on this Zoom. And I'll speak a little bit about it as they're flying by, and then afterwards I'll showcase a few of them in a bit more detail for you to appreciate. When Christianity spread, pagan worship of the Lars was frowned upon, but devotional imagery was deeply rooted and the church accepted the practice, albeit replacing the spirit of the house with the Virgin Mary. In this way, Madonnelle serve as an important bridge between paganism and modern Christianity. When I returned with better camera equipment in 2024 and again in 2025, thanks to the fellowship, I realized that I was interested in Roman society's collective relationship to these relics of a bygone era. And in doing so, I pulled the camera back, as you can see in these examples, and tried to focus on the relationship between people and these sidewalk shrines. Just to speak a little bit also about my process while you're seeing the slideshow here, I discovered after a fair bit of trial and error that quite a few of these icons are actually have been located in Google Maps. So Google Maps became a great starting place for my research and trying to find and locate places to photograph. So I would often find some of the more prominent ones listed there. I created a Google Map kind of folder where I could house all the images I was trying to go photograph. And then I would, get up in the morning and I would travel to one of the locations. And in that neighborhood, I would start with, with that particular shrine that I found in Google, and then wander for hours, kind of wandering the streets and looking. And I would find many, many, many more. And in doing that, I effectively covered much of the city, especially, the central area of Rome, but as well as many of the suburbs. And ultimately, as I said, found over 290 of these sidewalk shrines. I was photographing again with a digital camera, so I would also bring a tripod, and that way would enable me to capture long exposure images later in the day. And also sometimes even during the day, I would use a neutral density filter to also create longer exposures and bring some blurring and movement, motion of individuals into the foreground of the image in some way similar to the work that I'd done in the religious spaces. Okay, I think I just went around to the beginning again. I'm going to showcase a few of my favorite images here and highlight some of the details that can be difficult to notice at this scale. Most of the images attempt to highlight our relationship to the Madonnelle, juxtaposing a person or group of people, usually largely unaware of the religious icon looming above them. And I love the detail that's revealed, through what's able to be captured with the camera, both, amongst the people who are part of the photograph as well as the Madonnelle themselves. The Madonnelle no longer serve the civic function of guiding wayward travelers, and nor are they important religious sites in our increasingly secular society. Yet they remain potent symbols as architectural elements in the urban landscape. Largely ignored by passersby, I hope my images cause viewers to reconsider the Madonnelle and appreciate them for their idiosyncratic architectural beauty amongst an increasingly commercialized landscape. One of the things that I worked on after coming back to the States and coming back to Hamilton is an interactive map that allows you to explore the project. And you can see it by the QR code there on the screen. I'm also just going to jump to my website for a moment to show that to you, and then I'm going to wrap up and turn it over to my colleague. Let's see here. Jump out to that. Oops. Okay. So this is a preview basically of what the Google Map interface looks like. It has both a map feature and a satellite, as well as the ability to add labels and or turn those off. And you can see here the sites that have been located here in Google Maps, and you can just click on one of those to zoom in, and it brings you in and highlights particular locations that are part of the project. So one of the goals with this was to create an interactive tool that would allow a pilgrim or an interested party to basically interface with this on their phone and to explore the locations, get a preview of what my experience was with the location, and then potentially travel there using Google Maps as the interface to explore it. So I've been working with Hamilton to get all of these online. They're not all 290 are not quite yet online, but they will be soon. And you can basically see kind of the interface here. It allows you to get the address as well as the neighborhood, and then you can scroll through and, see the list of all the different locations here on the left side and jump to a particular location that you're interested in. You can obviously also zoom back out on the map feature and explore it that way. So I like the ability to see things in different formats. Sometimes things are meant to be seen in an exhibition. Sometimes they can be explored online. And one of the main goals of this project was to create this web-based interface that would allow users to experience it via map and also potentially to travel there themselves and to experience it. I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint for one more minute, and then I'll turn it over. So let me get back to that. And the other way that I'm hoping viewers can experience this is via a book format. And so I have a maquette of a book for this, and I'm sort of looking at this point for publishers and hoping to find someone who's interested in making a physical version of it as well. And this just sort of gives you a little preview of what that might look like with different locations in Italy, as well as neighborhood with icons given locations of the shrines, as well as GPS coordinates and street address. Again, it's sort of another way to interact with the project and to hopefully as a user or viewer explore the work. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I welcome any comments or suggestions after Gonzalo's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robert. Gonzalo, welcome. We're delighted to have you join us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the Lindsay and Jones Memorial Research Fund for supporting this research. Its support has been fundamental in allowing us to carry out the file work and to arrive at the results that I will share today. I would also like to thank Thomas, who over the past 2 years has always been attentive and willing to accompany this process. This research is located in the Sacred Valley of the Incas in Cusco, Peru. What we seek to understand is how, in a territory with a very high symbolic density, new forms of ritual architecture are emerging, linked to transnational communities that arrive in the valley to carry out hybrid spiritual practice. This practice do not necessarily take place in transnational temples or institutional religion buildings. Rather, they make use of light, flexible, removable, or semi-permanent structures. The central thesis is that these structures function as open and permeable device capable of mediating between the ritual, the bodies of the participants, and the endless landscape which it considers sacred. In order to understand this research, we must first understand the place where it takes place. The Sacred Valley of Incas, el Valle Sagrado de los Incas in Spanish, is not only an attractive landscape or tourist destination. It is the territory that over the centuries has accumulated a strong symbolic ritual and spiritual density. In the Andean world, territory is not understood as a neutral surface. Mountains, river, paths, and archaeological sites are part of a living network of relationships. The mountains, known as apus, are not only geographical elements, but also tutelary entities and protective presence. During the Inca period, Cusco was conceived as a center of the world, as a symbolic axis mundi, from which the territories was organized. For this reason, contemporary spiritual practice do not appear on an empty territory. They are instead on a geography that is already charged with memory, ritually, and meaning. Since ancient times, human beings have moved toward places considered sacred. Pilgrimages are part of many cultures. People travel to a mountain, a river, a tomb, a holy city, or a sanctuary where the sacred is believed to manifest itself with special intensity. For a long time, these forms of mobility were linked to organized religions and to relative stable roots. Today, however, we are witnessing an important transformation. Many people are no longer looking only for a sacred place in the traditional sense. Above all, they are looking for an experience of the sacred. This experience may be related to healing, introspection, contact with nature, the body, energy, or personal transformation. Within this new map of spiritual mobilities, the sacred valleys occupy a special place. It no longer functions only as a space of Inca memory, but also as a contemporary destination for those who seek spiritual experience outside conventional religious frameworks. We can see comparatively on these world maps how these routes have been changing. Within this new panorama, Peru occupies a particularly relevant place. Its geographical and cultural diversity allows very different traditions to coexist along the coast, the highlands, and the Amazon. In the century, many practices linked to Andean religions, Amazonian shamanism, traditional medicine, holistic healing, Catholic pilgrimage, and diverse contemporary forms of spirituality remain alive or have been reinterpreted. For this reason, I propose understanding Peru as a contemporary laboratory for the exploration of the sacred. Not because everything that happened there is pure or authentic in an essential sense, but because multiple layers intersect in the Peruvian territory. The indigenous, the colonial, the Catholic, the therapeutic, the tourist, the ecologic, and the global. The Sacred Valley is one of the places where this mixture becomes most visible. Our specific study area is located along the axis formed by the towns of Pisac, Calca, and Urubamba, within the Sacred Valley of the Incas. These towns are linked by the Vilcanota River and form part of the territory where Inca geological remains, town of Spanish origin, agricultural terrace, local communities, and new forms of contemporary spirituality still coexist. During an initial phase of exploration field work, we observe that many communities, retreat centers, healing space, and transnational spiritual groups are concentrated along this axis. In this area, we have identified at least 30 such spaces linked to hybrid spiritual practice. PSAC holds particular importance due to its high volume of tourists, its proximity to archaeological sites, and its ability to attract foreign residents, therapists, spiritual guides, and travelers seeking transformative experience. The town of the Sacred Valley are marked by a layering of cultures. Here we find Inca and pre-Inca structures, colonial churches, rural roads, tourist centers, and more recently, space linked to new global spiritualities. Traditionally, architecture was one of the main ways in which the sacred was made visible. In the Inca world, this presence could manifest itself in temples, terraces, ceremonial rocks, or places connected to the landscape. In the colonial period, Catholic Church established new religious centers within the towns. However, what we observe today in places like Pisac is that the symbolism referring to the sacred is no longer solely associated with monumental or institutional architecture, but appears in posters, murals, graffitis, temporary altars, textiles, tents, tipis, domes, ceremonial halls, and so on. There is a shift from the sacred place as a monument to the reference to the sacred as immediate experience. The research was developed through a qualitative approach with a mainly phenomenological and ethnographic focus. We didn't seek only to classify architectural forms, but to understand how these forms are lived, perceived, and activated by the people who practice in rituals. The phenomenological approach allows us to pay attention to experience, light, sound, heat, smells, the disposition of the body, and the feeling of recollection, intensity, or community, instead of looking of architecture only as a form object. We observe it's the support for a ritual experience. Data collection took place in several stages. First, we carry out digital ethnography, reviewing social media, websites, announcements, images, and records published by the communities themselves. This made it possible to map symbols, events, typologies, and forms of public presentation. Then, direct file work was conducted through photography documentation, spatial observation, interview, and testimonies from the key actors. The temporal scope of the study includes 4 visits over the course of 1 year, which allow us to recognize different ritual circles and to avoid an interpretation based on a single visit. One of the first findings was to confirm that the spatial response of this community does not correspond to institutional or monumental architecture. We don't find temples in the classic sense of the terms. Rather, we find a set of live, flexible, removable, or reconfigurable structures. For this reason, I propose speaking of a hybrid ecosystem of ritual architectures. Some structures are very simple, such as a ceremonial fire pit. Others are more elaborated, such as geodesic domes, yurts, tipis, malocas, or temazcals. These architectures are not important only because of their form. Their meaning appears when they are activated by the ritual. Before the ritual, they may seem neutral or provisional structures. During the ritual, they become charged with symbols, sounds, light, aromas, graded bodies, and spiritual intentionality. In this way, these forms act as a mutable interface between the Andean landscape, global spiritual imaginaries, and the experience of the participants. Based on the filework, it was possible to recognize 7 main typologies that organize this architectural ecosystem. They do not all have the same origin or the same symbolic charge, but they share certain features. They are light, circular or centralized structures, easily appropriate, and capable of being shared with meaning through ritual. The first is the ceremonial fire pit, perhaps the most elemental form. It is not a building, but it does produce center, gathering, and orientation. Around the fire, speech, silence, offering, and community are organized. The second is the tipi, a structure of native North America origin that appeared as a vertical and provisional shelter. Its conical form allows for the creation of a very clear symbolic access. The third is the tensile tent, a more functional structure used to cover collective activities, workshops, or gatherings. The fourth is the yurt, which comes from the nomadic tradition of Central Asia and generates a more inclusive, productive, and communal circular world. The fifth is the maloca, associated with Amazonian tradition and often used to plant medicine ceremonies or longer community gatherings. The sixth is the temazcal, a structure of high sensory intensity where heat, darkness, and stream products a very strong bodily experience. Finally, we find the geodesic dome, which does not come from the ancestral ritual tradition, but has been incorporated because of its ease of assembly, its geometry, and its strong contemporary association with New Age spirituality. These 7 typologies function as basic frameworks for ritual. They don't impose a closed liturgy but allow different forms of spiritual appropriation. A second important finding in these typologies rarely appear in a pure state. In the Sacred Valley, forms are mixed, adapted, and transformed. This happens because of the diversity of spiritual practice they must host, and also because of the climatic, material, and communal condition of the territory. We can recognize 3 main forms of hybridization. The first is complexification by addition, a basic structure incorporate new elements in order to increase its symbolic or functional capacity. For example, a ceremonial fire pit may integrate symbolic seating around in the form of a serpent of Kundalini, or a yurt may incorporate a fire pit inside. The second is complexification through membranes or coverings. This can be observed in structures of high sensory intensity, such as the temazcal, where blankets, plastic sheets, or fabrics are added in order to control light, heat, humidity, and acoustic. The third is the increase in complexity through permanent materiality. Some original lightweight structures incorporate local materials such as adobe, eucalyptus, wood, or wattle and daub, or more contemporary materials like concrete. Thus, the ephemerals become semi-permanent without entry losing its ritual character. This hybridation is no mere forma. It is a response to the need to create space adaptable to changing rituals and diverse communities. In this slide, we can see a compilation of the various forms of hybridation by addition, by complexity of membranes, and by permanent materiality that we have found and processed into graphic results. If typologies provide a basic geometry, symbols are what effectively charge the space. In these architectures, we find Andean textiles, mandalas, geometric figures, crystals, images of sacred animals, personal objects, musical instruments, altars, and graffiti linked to global spirituality. I call these elements floating symbols. They are symbols that travel from one culture to another and that often become partiality detached from the original context. They are not always used with the same meaning they had in their traditional of origin. Rather, they are select from their capacity to produce an immediate spiritual sensation, energy protection, healing, harmony, or connection. This leads us to concept of semantic emptying. Many symbols lost part of their original historical or theological density, but gain a new effectiveness within the contemporary ritual. They do not necessarily seek doctrinal coherence, but rather the product of a sensitive and spirituality able atmosphere. The complexity of this topic has led me to conduct a parallel personal research. Another central finding is that this architecture works through the intentional creation of atmospheres. It is not enough to raise a line of circular structures. What truly activates the space is the combination of light, sound, temperature, smell, texture, color, and bodily disposition. A tent, a dome, or a yurt may be relatively simple structures, but when dim-like, immersive sounds, chants, instruments, aromas, fire, textile, and bodies arranging in a circle are incorporated, the space acquires another density. In several observed practice, some play a fundamental role. Balls, drums, chants, or gongs produce an immersive acoustic experience. Light is worked through fabrics, membranes, or colors that modify the perception of the interior. Aromas help to sensoriality fix the experience, and in case such as the temazcal, heat becomes the main agent of bodily transformation. Ritual architecture does not operate only through its forms, but through its capacity to produce a shared atmosphere. The research led us to recognize that the body is not a secondary element within the ritual. The body does not only occupy space, it produces it. Through breathing, chanting, dancing, silence, meditation, rest, or exposure to heat, the body transforms an architectural structure structure in a spiritual, meaningful place. An empty yurt is not yet a sacred place. An empty dome does not produce transcendental experience by itself either. What activates the space is the presence of the ritualistic body, that is, the body willing to participate in a collective action shared with meaning. For this reason, architecture is not designed as a right stage, but as an adaptable membrane, is but allow people to sit in a circle, lie down, move, sing, remain silent, or approach the fire. In this context, the body becomes a vehicle of the numinous. The sacred is experienced as head vibration, sound, concentration, openness, or emotional intensity. Although many of these practices present themselves as free, open, and non-institutional, observation shows that they are not chaotic. They are organized through what we may call ritual choreographies. These choreographies are not always written down, but they appear in the way bodies are arranged, oriented, and moved. There is almost always a center, the fire, the altar, the ceremonial table, or the figure of the guide. This center acts as a spatial attractor. The bodies are placed around it, direct the grace towards it, approach it, move away from it. Often objects seen or remain silent. Circularity creates a sense of equality, community, and shared participation. These choreographies produce a floating devotion topology, a spatial organization of devotion that appears while the ritual lasts and dissolves when the parties end. This allows us to understand that the contemporary sacred place does not always need durable walls. Sometimes it needs a sequence of gestures, bodies, and symbols. Based on this research, we can propose three main conclusions. The first is the ephemeral architectures become an essential device for these transnational communities. Nomadic and hybrid typologies allow them to produce temporary ritual centers within the Sacred Valley. Their lightness is not a weakness. It allows them to respond to mobile, changing, and not institutional spiritual practice. The second conclusion is that a sense of sacredness is configured performatively. The sacred place is not given in advance by the architectural form, it is approached through ritual, atmosphere, floating symbols, and bodily participation. Architectural function as a support, while the experience of the sacred is so through action. The third conclusion is that the body is the ontological axis of this ritual architecture. In the body, sound, light, heat, smell, and movement are interpreted as spiritual experience. The body activates space, organizes the community, and allows the ritual to produce meaning. In summary, the sacred valley of the Incas can be understood as a contemporary laboratory where relationships between architecture, territory, and spirituality are being redefined. In closing, the research does not seek the claim that these new architecture forms replace Andean traditional or the historical forms of sacredness in the Sacred Valley. Rather, it seeks to show how, on a territory deeply imbued with memory, new ways of producing spiritual experience are emerging. These light hybrid and often ephemeral architecture forms invite us to broaden our understanding of architecture for a spiritual purpose, an architecture that does not always operate from permanence or monumentality, but also from atmosphere, the body, and shared experience. I'm once again grateful to the Lindsay Just Memorial Research Fund for making this work possible. Thank you very much for your attention.